L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Louis.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Je me lève pour la troisième fois pour débattre de ce projet de loi. Et avant d'entrer dans le cœur de mon discours, j'aimerais saisir l'occasion pour rendre hommage à trois femmes, dont deux que je connais depuis les années 90. Je parle, entre autres, de Mme Wendy Sukier et Mme Heidi Ratchen, qui, dans les années 90, ont été le fer de lance du mouvement qui visait à créer un registre des armes d'épaule. Et à cette époque-là, j'étais adjoint politique pour un député de cette Chambre, le député Clifford Lincoln, mon prédécesseur. Et donc, j'ai eu à travailler assez régulièrement avec ces deux dames qui, évidemment, ont poursuivi la bataille jusqu'à maintenant. Maintenant, évidemment, leurs efforts vont dans un autre sens. C'est plutôt de protéger les acquis que nous avons gagnés depuis une bonne quinzaine d'années. La troisième dame que j'aimerais souligner, c'est Suzanne Laplante-Edward. Elle aussi s'est battue pour le registre et continue à se battre pour le maintenir. Et Mme Edward, comme vous le savez, c'est la mère de Anne-Marie Edward, qui fut victime de la tuerie à l'école polytechnique. Et j'ai appris à connaître Mme Edward depuis 2-3 ans, évidemment en rapport avec la lutte contre les efforts du gouvernement de nous enlever cet outil si important, je dirais primordial pour la sécurité public au Canada. J'ai aussi l'honneur de représenter Mme Edward à la Chambre des communes. C'est une de mes concitoyennes et je suis fier de la représenter ici en cette Chambre. Mme Edward est une dame de fer dans le meilleur sens du mot, Monsieur le Président. C'est une dame avec une personnalité de velours, avec un grand cœur, une grande conscience sociale, mais qui a une ténacité de fer, Monsieur le Président. Et je salue tous ces efforts. Et je dirais à Mme Laplante-Edward, à Mme Sukier, à Mme Ratchen que leurs efforts n'ont pas été en vain. Évidemment, elles doivent être un peu découragées de voir le fruit de leurs efforts, en fait, détruit. Mais il faut savoir que je suis absolument convaincu, comme bien des gens à travers le pays, que ce registre, pendant son existence, a sans aucune réserve sauvé des vies, soit des vies qui auraient été enlevées par voie de suicide ou par voie d'homicide, mais le fait reste que des vies ont été sauvées. Et encore une fois, je souligne les efforts de ces trois dames. Et évidemment, il y a d'autres qui ont fait partie de ce mouvement, qui ont beaucoup contribué aussi. Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais m'attaquer ou m'adresser à certains, ce que j'appellerais des mythes qui ont été présentés par ceux qui veulent démanteler le registre des armes à feu, ou peut-être, devrais-je dire, au lieu de mythes, les faux arguments qui ont été avancés par plusieurs. Premier mythe ou faux argument, c'est l'idée que la question des armes longues, la question des armes d'épaule touche uniquement la population rurale de ce pays et que le problème des armes à feu en milieu urbain, c'est surtout un problème d'armes de poing. C'est très rusé de présenter, de brosser ce tableau. C'est très efficace sur le plan des communications. Je parlais du fait que le gouvernement a environ 1500 professionnels de la communication à son emploi, mais c'est très fin au niveau des communications, mais je dois dire que c'est une fausse dichotomie. Mr. Speaker, the government has been very shrewd in presenting this debate, this issue, in some very simplistic black and white terms, namely that the problem of guns in cities is a problem of handguns, and that when we talk about long guns, we're talking about rural populations that need long guns either to protect their agricultural operations or to pursue the traditional culture of hunting, as the honourable member across the way mentioned before. But I think this is a false dichotomy. I think it's a false dichotomy because more and more, and I mentioned this in my second reading speech, more and more urban dwellers are buying long guns, and they're buying replicas of guns they see in movies and video games. And in fact, there are in the metropolis of Toronto alone, so we're not talking about a rural region here, we're talking about the great metropolis of Toronto, there are 287,000 non-restricted firearms that are registered. So to say that it's just a rural versus urban issue is, I think, a false argument, and I just wanted to mention that. The second myth or false argument is that all these inquiries to the gun registry system, some estimates are as high as 17,000 per day, that they're all just a function of an inquiry, a routine, perfunctory inquiry, for example, of a driver of a car who's receiving a parking ticket. In other words, these queries are all automatic queries that are secondary to a rather routine and mundane main query. But that's not what we heard at committee. That's not what we heard at committee from Mr. Mario Harel, Chief of Police of the Gatineau Police Service and Vice President of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, who told the committee that while, I quote, "There is truth to the fact that a number of these queries are what has been referred to as auto queries, these cases are rare, which we believe is an endorsement of the fact that law enforcement views this information as a valuable tool, a bit of information that, when combined with other information, assists in assessing a situation an officer may face." Now, Mr. Speaker, the third myth, the third false argument is this idea that the registry has not been proven to save lives. Well, there was a study presented to the committee by Mr. Etienne Blais, PhD, and Marie-Pierre Gagné, MSc, and Isabelle Linteau, that showed that the registry does save lives. But just putting that aside for a moment, because we can get into a battle of studies, and the honourable member from the Yukon will bring up Dr. Gary Mauser's study and another gentleman's study, and so on. So we can get into these battling studies. But let's just look at the thing from a logical, practical, common sense point of view. And I know that the party opposite likes to focus on practical, common sense arguments. It's very hard to prove that the registry saves a life, Mr. Speaker. Theoretically, it makes sense. Practically, it's very hard to prove. It's, for example, impossible to prove that I made it to Ottawa. I made it to Ottawa along the highway today and remained alive because of the 100-kilometer-an-hour speed limit, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, I respect. But it's very hard to prove that this is why I'm here speaking to you today. In fact, you won't see a headline tomorrow. A member of Parliament from Lac St. Louis, his life was saved because of the 100-kilometer-per-hour speed limit. I will not be a statistic. I will not be a statistic. But we know that this speed limit saves lives. It's something that makes sense, Mr. Speaker. So it's very hard to prove that someone is alive because of either the speed limit or the registry. Now, a fourth myth or false argument is the idea that people are still killed with long guns, even though we have a registry. Well, I'd like to say to this House that there is no policy instrument that can fully prevent that which it aims to prevent. It can only control that which is socially undesirable. So this is I would call an ironclad law of public policy. Social science is almost always based on the findings and recommendations of social science. Sorry, public policy is almost always based on the findings and recommendations of social science, which itself, by definition, comes with associated margins of error. I can boldly predict, based on this ironclad law of public policy, that dog bites will continue into the foreseeable future, Mr. Speaker, even by dogs who have been registered with City Hall. I think I can really put my money on that. And I will also predict that car theft will continue into the future, even though cars are registered with the province. And unfortunately, I think it's clear to all of us that gun crimes will not disappear, Mr. Speaker, even should the registry by some miracle survive. And there will be, unfortunately, future gun crimes, and some of them will be will be quite heinous. You know, it's unfortunate, and this will happen even with if the registry were to survive. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the members opposite will tell you that registering guns just doesn't work because criminals don't register guns. Well, I can see that point. Criminals don't register their guns. So that means that criminals don't register their handguns, and the only people registering handguns would be law-abiding citizens, as the members across the hall like to invoke, the law-abiding citizen. And as I said in my second reading speech, the people of my riding who are gun owners are sterling citizens. They are the most active volunteers. They are conscientious and responsible. That's not the point. But the point I'm trying to make with respect to the handgun registry is that if the government were being logical, it would say, well, registries don't work because criminals don't register their firearms. Therefore, we're getting rid of the long gun registry and we're getting rid of the handgun registry. But thankfully, they're not getting rid of the handgun registry. But it just points out the fundamental contradiction in their thinking on gun control, Mr. Speaker. The other myth or false argument is that the registry is wasteful and useless. I've heard that many times. The gun registry is completely wasteful. The gun registry is completely useless. We hear that from the Minister of Public Safety on a continual basis. But the fact remains, and we have evidence here. We have police evidence, including RCMP evidence, and if the government doesn't buy the RCMP's evidence, then there's a problem between the government and the RCMP. There's a lack of faith in the RCMP by the government. But there's concrete evidence that the registry helps with police investigations. Again, I'll quote Mr. Mario Harel, the chief of the Gatineau Police Service and vice president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, who said, the elimination of the gun registry will add significant costs to our investigations, costs which will be downloaded to police services and lead to crucial delays in gaining investigative information. The word downloading seems to come up a lot with this government. We download costs of the prison agenda to the provinces. We download, we download all kinds of things to the provinces. Well, here's an example where, again, the government's going to be downloading costs, in this case, to provincial and municipal police forces. Now, one doesn't have to take Mr. Harel's word for it. One just has to listen to what Waterloo Regional Police Chief Matt Torrigan has said about the long gun registry's usefulness in police investigations. And he's given a couple of concrete examples. One is real, the other is more hypothetical, but based on typical cases that the police are involved with. To quote Chief Torrigan, we came across a crime scene recently with a man who was obviously deceased by gunshot, and a long gun was at the scene. Because of the registry, we were able to trace the weapon to the person who had just sold it to the man who was deceased. We determined it was a suicide, and the investigation stopped there. Now, we know that, from this example, that if there had been no registry, the police would have thought maybe this is a crime, we have to open up an investigation, and many hours of valuable police time would have been wasted looking for a perpetrator of a crime that was really a suicide, Mr. Speaker. So another example given by Chief Torrigan is more hypothetical but no doubt commonplace. Say a group of thieves break into a farmhouse near Montreal and steal a shotgun. They saw it off to conceal it better under their clothes and drive to Windsor, Ontario, where in the course of committing a bank robbery, they drop the gun and flee the scene. Because of the registry, the police can find out that the gun is owned by a Montreal man, a victim of theft. It might give the force a lot more leads to go on. For example, there might be witnesses to the break-in in Montreal. The registry would thus allow coordination of efforts between police departments in order to efficiently resolve the case and move on to something else. And there's more anecdotal evidence. And the following example is from the 2010 RCMP firearms report, the one that was ready quite a while back, but only released January 19th after the committee had finished its committee hearings on the bill. Here's a quote from the report. A large municipal force contacted CFP Northwest for assistance in recovering obliterated serial numbers on 2 firearms seized in a robbery and kidnapping investigation. After the serial number of the guns was restored, Northwest used the Canadian Firearms Program's registry database to determine that the gun was registered to one of the suspects and had not been reported or stolen. In another example, the registry helped police link a grandfather's gun to his grandson who had perpetrated a gun crime. And again, I quote the RCMP. CFP Northwest was asked to assist in a shooting investigation. They confirmed through the Canadian Firearms Information System that the firearm was one of 7 registered to the same individual, and it had not been reported lost, missing, or stolen. RCMP investigators met with the registered owner, who was able to account for only 4 of his 7 firearms. The subject was interviewed in order to establish a possible link between him and the shooting suspects. As a result of the interview, the owner's grandson was identified as one of the accused in the shooting, and all 7 firearms were accounted for in the follow-up interview of the accused. Numerous firearms-related charges were laid in relation to the incident. So they caught the grandson. If they hadn't caught the grandson using the registry, the grandson might still be wandering around with a gun. Who knows what might have happened, Mr. Speaker? And this is another point I'd like to make about those who want to dismantle the registry. They won't admit to possibilities. And this is, I think, a fundamental error when it comes to social science. It's all about probabilities and possibilities. I asked Dr. Gary Mauser in committee, who did a fine presentation. It was quite rigorous, and he was a very agreeable witness, Mr. Speaker. This is not an attack on Dr. Mauser. But I asked him, after I gave him some examples of how plausibly the registry might have saved lives, I asked him, in his opinion, in the 10 years the registry has existed, is it not possible that one life may have been saved? I wasn't even asking Dr. Mauser, was one life saved? I asked him, is it not possible in this universe of probabilities that one life may have been saved? And the answer was a categorical, it's impossible. So this is what we're dealing with. This is not, we're not dealing with open-minded thinking on this issue. We're dealing with categorical statements that actually are nonsensical when you really think about it. Again, I think this is a mistake. The Liberal Party, my party, in the last election campaign, quite cognizant of the fact that some legitimate law-abiding firearms owners feel criminalized by this system, proposed that the first failure to register not be a criminal offense, thereby compromising with the government, thereby acknowledging one of the points the government is making. There was some movement on the issue. It would have solved the problem. We could have kept the registry. People would not have felt criminalized, and Canada would be safer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.